Let me be direct with you from the outset. What happened 3 days ago in Geneva is not a diplomatic formality. It is not routine diplomatic engagement. What happened is three nuclear powers just signed an agreement that fundamentally restructures the balance of power in the Middle East, and most Americans have absolutely no idea it even occurred. I am looking at a joint communique that was released at 2:47 a.m. Geneva time on May 2nd, 2026. This document has been analyzed by strategic analysts across three continents for the past 72 hours. What it represents is not a ceasefire agreement. It is not a non proliferation treaty. It is not a trade deal. What it represents is China, Russia, and Pakistan establishing a mutual defense coordination framework specifically focused on the Persian Gulf and Indian Ocean region. In the next 20 minutes, I am going to walk you through exactly why this agreement changes everything about American naval presence in the Middle East, why it represents the single largest strategic realignment since the fall of the Soviet Union, and why the effects are already showing up in energy markets, shipping insurance rates, and Pentagon contingency planning. This is Daily Brief. Subscribe now if you have not already, because what we are about to cover is being actively debated in classified briefings at the State Department right now. Let's start with the geography, because understanding the terrain explains why this agreement matters so profoundly. The Persian Gulf connects to the Indian Ocean through the Strait of Hormuz, a choke point approximately 21 miles wide at its narrowest point. Through this strait passes roughly 21 million barrels of oil per day, representing about one-fifth of global petroleum consumption. The United States has maintained naval dominance in this region since 1949 through the Fifth Fleet, headquartered in Bahrain. At any given time, the U.S. maintains between 40 and 70 vessels in the region, including at least one carrier strike group. This presence has been the cornerstone of what military strategists call freedom of navigation, but what is more accurately described as American control of global energy supply chains. According to the International Energy Agency's April 2026 report, 90% of Gulf oil exports transit through this choke point. The economic leverage this provides is not theoretical. During the 1973 oil embargo, oil prices quadrupled in 6 months. During the 1979 Iranian Revolution, prices doubled. The ability to guarantee or threaten this flow has been fundamental to American geopolitical power for 75 years. Subscribe if you are watching this and realizing you are not getting this level of analysis anywhere else. Now let's talk about what these three nuclear powers actually agreed to do. Announcement number one, joint naval exercises beginning June 15th, 2026. And this one matters more than anything else because of the specific location and composition. The agreement specifies tripartite naval drills involving the Russian Pacific Fleet, the Chinese People's Liberation Army Navy, and the Pakistani Navy conducting coordinated operations in the Arabian Sea and approaches to the Strait of Hormuz. The drills will include submarine warfare exercises, anti-ship missile deployments, and what the document specifically calls area denial capabilities demonstration. According to reporting by Reuters and confirmed by multiple regional defense analysts, China is deploying 12 surface vessels, including the aircraft carrier Shandong. Russia is contributing 8 vessels, including the frigate Admiral Gorshkov equipped with Zircon hypersonic missiles, and Pakistan is providing coastal defense integration and submarine support with its Augusta 90B submarine fleet. Captain Michael Rodriguez, former commander of the USS Abraham Lincoln Carrier Strike Group, stated in an interview with Defense News on May 3rd that these exercises represent, and I am quoting him directly here, the first time in modern history that three nuclear armed powers have conducted coordinated denial of access exercises specifically targeting American naval patterns in the Gulf region. The timing matters. These exercises are scheduled to begin exactly 30 days before the expiration of U.S. basing agreements with Kuwait and Bahrain, agreements currently under renegotiation. That is not coincidence. That is signaling. Received. That is announcement number one. Announcement number two, establishment of a permanent coordination mechanism. This is the part that transforms this from a symbolic gesture into an institutional structure. The Geneva Communique establishes what it calls the Indian Ocean Security Consultation Framework, with rotating leadership, quarterly ministerial meetings, and a permanent staff secretariat based in Islamabad. The framework explicitly commits all three signatories to coordinated responses to external military interventions in the region and joint contingency planning for energy security scenarios. This language is precise and consequential. Coordinated responses to external military interventions is diplomatic code for mutual defense obligations. Joint contingency planning for energy security means these three powers are gaming out scenarios for controlling or denying access to Gulf energy exports. According to Bloomberg reporting from May 4th, insurance premiums for tankers transiting the Strait of Hormuz increased by 47% in the 48 hours following the Geneva announcement. Lloyd's of London has quietly circulated revised risk assessments to major shipping clients. That response tells you everything about how the maritime insurance industry interprets this development. They are pricing in dramatically elevated geopolitical risk. Received. That is announcement number 2. Announcement number 3, and this one almost nobody in the mainstream media is connecting correctly. The agreement includes technology sharing provisions specifically related to submarine detection and counter-detection systems. Russia has committed to sharing its latest sonar-resistant coating technology originally developed for the Yasin-class submarines. China is providing its AI-enhanced pattern recognition systems for identifying surface vessel signatures. Pakistan is contributing its shallow water operational doctrine developed specifically for the unique acoustic environment of the Persian Gulf and Arabian Sea. Think carefully about what this represents. The U.S. Navy's primary advantage in the Gulf region has been its ability to detect and track submarines using advanced sonar arrays and anti-submarine warfare capabilities. These three powers are specifically coordinating to neutralize that advantage. Stay with me because this is where the narrative completely changes and where the implications become impossible to ignore. When President Biden was asked about the Geneva Agreement during a press conference on May 3rd, he called it routine diplomatic engagement and suggested it represented ongoing dialogue on regional security. Secretary of State Antony Blinken echoed this characterization, describing it as not fundamentally different from previous trilateral consultations. That response is either profound strategic misunderstanding or deliberate public misdirection. This is not routine. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute's analysis published May 4th, this represents the first formal defense coordination agreement between these three specific powers since the 1950s Soviet-China alliance. The reason this matters is the same reason the NATO expansion mattered in the 1990s. Formal coordination mechanisms create institutional momentum, they establish communication channels, build interoperability, and normalize joint operations. They transform ad hoc cooperation into predictable patterns that adversaries must account for in all contingency planning. And here is what makes this particularly consequential. The United States currently maintains approximately 45,000 troops across the Middle East, primarily in Kuwait, Qatar, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. Those troops and the naval vessels supporting them operate under the assumption of overwhelming conventional superiority and freedom of maneuver. This agreement directly challenges both assumptions. If China, Russia, and Pakistan coordinate their substantial submarine fleets, their combined anti-ship missile capabilities, and their coastal defense systems, they create an environment where American carrier strike groups operate under genuine contested conditions for the first time since World War II. The U.S. Navy currently operates 11 aircraft carriers. China operates 3, Russia operates 1. But in the constrained waters of the Persian Gulf, carrier vulnerability to submarines and anti-ship missiles negates much of their advantage. The Pentagon's own 2025 wargame simulations, portions of which were leaked to the Washington Post in March, showed that in a Persian Gulf scenario with coordinated opposition, U.S. Navy casualties could exceed those of any conflict since 1945. That is not speculation, that is the Pentagon's own assessment, and that assessment was conducted before this Geneva Agreement added a formal coordination structure to what were previously ad hoc Russian and Chinese activities in the region. Received. That is announcement number 3. Now, let's talk about what is really happening behind the headlines because there are two stories playing out simultaneously, and the mainstream media is only covering one of them. The public story is about routine diplomacy, regional security dialogue, and overlapping interests in counterterrorism and stability. That is the story you will read in the New York Times or hear on CNN. The actual story is about the end of American military primacy in the Middle East and the emergence of a coordinated alternative power structure specifically designed to constrain U.S. options. Look at the response from traditional American allies in the region. Saudi Arabia released a statement on May 3rd describing the Geneva Agreement as a welcome development for regional stability. The UAE Foreign Ministry called it a positive step toward multilateral security cooperation. Kuwait's defense minister met with the Pakistani ambassador on May 4th for what was officially described as consultations on regional developments. None of those responses criticized the agreement. None of them reaffirm exclusive security partnerships with the United States. All of them are carefully positioning themselves to maintain relationships with both the traditional American security umbrella and this new trilateral framework. Think carefully about what this represents. When the United States announces a major military initiative, and its regional allies immediately begin hedging their bets by praising an alternative framework organized by American rivals, that is not ambiguity. That is not diplomatic nuance. That is a verdict on perceived American reliability and staying power. The Biden administration responded with what it called consultations with regional partners and continued commitment to Gulf security. But notice what did not happen. There was no significant military deployment announced. There was no expansion of existing exercises. There was no public commitment from Gulf allies to expand U.S. basing rights. The silence is the signal. Traditional allies are not rushing to reaffirm American security guarantees. They are waiting to see how this plays out, which means they assess a real possibility that the new trilateral framework could become the primary security structure in the region. If you own a business with exposure to energy costs, if you manage a supply chain dependent on Gulf oil, if you operate in freight transportation or petrochemicals, what is happening in Geneva is not a foreign policy story. It is a cost structure story. Insurance rates are already rising. Shipping companies are already gaming out alternative routes. Energy traders are already pricing in geopolitical risk premiums. This pattern has repeated throughout history, and every time it repeats, the outcome is the same. The Peloponnesian War. Athens and Sparta, the two dominant Greek powers, fought for 27 years. Both sides exhausted their treasuries, devastated their populations, and destroyed their fleets. And who emerged as the dominant power in the Mediterranean? Persia, which had stayed largely on the sidelines, preserving its strength while the Greek city-states destroyed each other. The explanation of the parallel is exact. The United States and Iran have been engaged in escalating confrontation in the Middle East since 1979. Both sides have expended enormous resources. The U.S. has spent over $8 trillion on Middle East military operations since 2001, according to Brown University's Costs of War project. Iran has endured crippling sanctions, economic isolation, and continuous covert operations against its nuclear program and regional proxies. And who is emerging as the organized coordinator of regional security? China, which preserved its resources, built its economy, expanded its navy, and is now stepping into a coordination role alongside Russia and Pakistan while the traditional combatants remain locked in their Cold War patterns. The parallel is not approximate. It is structural. Great power exhaustion creates opportunities for ascending powers. The Geneva Agreement is China's announcement that it is ready to organize an alternative regional security architecture, and it is doing so with the cooperation of a nuclear-armed Russia and a strategically positioned Pakistan. So, where does this leave us? Let me give you three clear paths because there is no honest middle ground here. Path 1, the United States maintains its current Middle East posture and accepts operating in a contested environment. This means higher operational costs, elevated risk to naval vessels, continued erosion of regional ally confidence, and permanent geopolitical risk premiums in energy markets. Under this path, we see persistent oil prices in the 95-115 range, continued reshoring of manufacturing to reduce supply chain exposure, and gradual reduction of U.S. military footprint as the costs and risks outweigh the benefits. Probability 60%. Path 2, the United States escalates dramatically, deploying additional carrier groups, expanding basing agreements, and directly challenging the trilateral framework through aggressive freedom of navigation operations. This path carries obvious escalation risks, potential for direct military confrontation with nuclear-armed powers, and likely alienation of Gulf allies who do not want to choose sides explicitly. Under this path, we see sharp spikes in oil prices, potential for actual naval incidents, and domestic political backlash as casualties mount. Probability 15%. Path 3, the United States accepts managed decline of its Middle East security role and pivots resources toward containing China in the Pacific. This means acknowledging that it cannot simultaneously dominate the Middle East and the Pacific, and making the strategic choice to prioritize the Pacific theater. Under this path, the trilateral framework becomes the de facto regional security structure. China gains enormous geopolitical leverage over energy supplies to Europe and Asia, and American allies in the Gulf increasingly align their policies with the trilateral powers rather than Washington. Probability 25%. I think we are closer to Path 3 than the headlines suggest. The Pentagon's own strategic documents from 2023 and 2024 explicitly prioritize Pacific deterrence over Middle East engagement. The National Defense Strategy says it clearly. The pacing threat is China, and resources must be allocated accordingly. That strategic logic has not changed, and this Geneva Agreement simply makes the choice more explicit and immediate. But here is the complication. Oil markets do not care about Pentagon strategic priorities. If the U.S. reduces its Middle East security commitments and energy prices spike as a result, the domestic political consequences will be severe. Presidents lose elections over gas prices. The American public will not accept $6 per gallon gasoline because of strategic pivot logic, which means Path 3 is extremely difficult politically, even if it is strategically necessary. Here are the questions I want you to take away. Can the United States afford to maintain credible deterrence in both the Middle East and the Pacific simultaneously? If forced to choose, does political reality allow the strategic choice the Pentagon wants to make? And what does it mean for global order when three nuclear powers openly coordinate to constrain American options in a region the U.S. has dominated for 75 years? Tell me in the comments what you think happens next. Tell me if you think the administration chooses path 1, 2, or 3. Tell me if you see a fourth path I have not described. We will keep tracking every development in the Gulf region, the trilateral coordination mechanisms, and the American strategic response. That is what Daily Brief does every single day. Subscribe now. Share this analysis with everyone in your network who is trying to understand what the Geneva Agreement actually means for energy security, for American power, and for the global balance that has structured international relations since 1945. Turn on notifications so you do not miss the next update, and we will see you in the next analysis.